All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am Jared Block.
I'm Roger Pfeiffer. Zach Tony.
Dylan Larson.
Connor Christophers. Tyler Hill.
And we are the 2018 NSPS students from Northeast Wisconsin Technical College, located in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We treated this survey as an original survey. When we were establishing tasks for each person, we focused basically on each person's strengths or weaknesses. And then as we continued along the day, doing the topo, doing the boundary, we figured out with the conditions we had for weather, for taping, that we needed a couple more guys to help control the plumb bob and pull tension. And then it was also nice to have one more rod man, so we would have two rod men. So basically, as the day went on, we just learned that we had to work as a team rather than focusing on those individual strengths. So we focused on site conditions. Las Vegas is a very arid climate. It's considered a subtropical hot desert with limited rainfall. It's obviously very rocky, unstable soil. After the day was over, our ankles and feet were hurting after crossing all those rocks. And when we were placing property corners or nails leading to the property corners, we ran into some soft spots where there could have been air that had to be compacted down around the nail to eliminate that air. And then obviously low vegetation, as in cactus and sagebrush and those other different types of bushes that were in the way as you're trying to tape. So now Brock will take over.
So, with approaching our boundary, we created a north-south line that was parallel to our given bearing that was given on the morning of the survey. And our bearing was north 5 degrees west. We then sighted that bearing through the middle, because since it was a square, it was going to be parallel. Sighted that bearing north. We set a stake farther than the edge of our topo or our site for lining in purposes. And then we did the opposite bearing to the south, checked the two stakes that we set, and then through the center point to make sure they were straight. Then we turned the angles 90 degrees to the right and left, to east and west of our north and south line to those bearings. Did the same thing, checked it all, and then once we had the midpoints that we had already set, we would line those. Let me back up. Before we went, we would line in our midpoints. Once they were lined in, we could start to move to tape to our parcel corners. We could two-tape or tape. Go from the two corners and see where they meet, and we would tape towards them and walk it in. To check that, once we had the corner put, we could check the hypotenuse from the center point to the corner, or from the two midpoints if they were equal. Oh, I should do this first. Sorry about that. So we checked the hypotenuse. If they were equal, we were good. We did find that they were not equal right away, so that was where most of our error came from. And I will now turn it over to Zach.
All right, I'll talk about how we taped. It was important to us to know our procedures because it is something we could control, our measurements for repetition. We took two 100-foot tapes and we calibrated them before the competition. In our note keeping, we did do a temperature correction. We checked the weather before heading to the site and used that degree. Lining in, for the north-south and west-east center line, we would have a person at a stake that Brock described where we set up, and would go from the center hub, and then the guy at the stake had a level rod, and then the rear tape person would line in the forward person. And then when taping the full 208 feet, we had two guys on the established points, and they would line in the taping crew. For tension and plumbing, when pulling, we checked if there's any sag in the tape, or if it was kinked on vegetation. We tried to go over all the vegetation we could. We had pretty much the full crew taping, person on each end pulling for tension, and 2 people plumbing. When plumbing, we made sure the tape was low as we could because it was windy, of course. And then the plumb up string was over the tape, not perpendicular, but over the top of it. And then when we're taking measurements, we'd run our thumb for the hundreds. And then if it was too windy, we lightly bounced it to control it. And then our layout with the steel tape. We did the compass bearing for a general line. Then we measured forward to the calculated distance. From the center control point, that hub, we measured out 104 feet, half the distance of the acre side. Then we set a nail at 100 for a temporary point. We checked that immediately, adjusted it by hundreds if we needed to. Then we set our nail at 104.36 feet. Then we measured back to control point, record that measurement. Then we adjusted fallen and corrected the set point. Then we corrected the point if needed. When we measured the full north-south or west-east line, we measured it forward, back, and forward. And then with our quadrant, we did diagonals from the center point to our parcel corner and our midpoints. We did that back and forth for everyone.
So for our topographic mapping, we thought the best way to approach this was to just set up a grid. We ended up setting up a grid 240 feet by 240 feet at 20-foot intervals. We used the lap that was provided to stake out 20-foot intervals along our boundary of our parcel. We chose to use 20-foot intervals just because we observed an elevation change of about 6 feet throughout our site, and we thought that that would be a good way to represent the elevation change and contours for 1-foot contours on our map. We also wanted to show a couple of washouts on our site, so we chose to shoot the top and the bottom of those washouts because it didn't exactly fall right in between our grid points. So for our leveling procedure, we started out by doing a 2-peg test just to make sure our level was in good working order, knowing that we did travel from Wisconsin with our levels on the airplane and whatnot. So that came out good, and we started off by running a level loop throughout our site. We backsighted the center control point and then used 4 setups, sighting our 4 corners, and checked back in at our center point. Our crew responsibilities, we utilized 1 person on the auto level, sighting and reading the rod, and then 1 person to take notes. We used 2 people to use both Philadelphia rods, kind of in a leapfrog fashion, just to speed up the data collection. The other 2 crew members stood on the outside to the boundaries just to help the rodmen line in and make sure we were getting true on our grid. And we also checked into our nails that we were set throughout just to make sure that we were carrying our elevations correctly.
So there were several sources of error that could have occurred during the project. Obviously taping. We did run a temperature correction, but we decided not to use it because it was nominal given the situation with the wind. Vegetation going over the top of it, we tried, when doing that, we tried to keep most of the tape pulling below our waist so we could block the wind for the plumb bob, or sometimes we actually used somebody aiding the plumb bobs in case the wind was going so much. Another source of error was in our boundary layout. So when we started, we ran a straight line through our center point, but the line that was running east-west was not perpendicular to that north-south line through the center. And we knew this because of the hypotenuse checks in the corners. So we knew there was an error there, and I'll talk about that in a second. And we also knew that there could be error through the topographic map. Our grid size, maybe we could have gone a little smaller, but we kind of decided that the 20-foot grid was good. Error in reading the rod. We ran a level loop, and we had to redo it at one point because we came off by a foot exactly, so we just decided to rerun it right away, and we came out and checked in. So this brings us to the office calculations, and how we kind of decided to do this is we knew we ran out of time, otherwise we would have used our hypotenuses to figure out the corners, but running out of time, we decided to use bearings and the law of sines and cosines to find interior angles. And we use those interior angles to go from our center point out to our one of our property corners. And we actually then hand calculated out the coordinates on these with these bearings and went all the way around and then seen where we started and where we closed. And the difference between that was 0.2. So, and then we ended up with a precision of 1 in 4,113. And then we had an area of 0.996 acres. And basically what happened is we had a little rhombus going on. So we had like 95 degrees in 2 corners, and then we had 85 degrees in 2 corners. But when you traveled the full distance around, because of the redundancy that we had with the taping, that's what the precision ended up being.
And then bringing this to the end, main goal of what everybody should get out of this is what we can take away from it. The main goal is to, I guess, practice lining in, staking, and doing the topo. And this can be applied to Engineers Without Borders, and some projects that can be placed into is irrigation for drainage, for crops and stuff like that. Staking for wells have to be placed a certain amount of feet away from each other. Lining in for possible irrigation systems. That should all be kind of taken in for future projects. I think a lot of the other things we could probably do in the future is do our sooner redundancy checks. We did our hypotenuses later on, and that's when our time was getting short, so maybe time management would be definitely a bigger factor to look into in the future projects that we might be working on. And another factor that plays in also is the location where you're going to be. Try and plan ahead, have like a safe exit route. Just good to have a good safety plan. So, anybody have any questions?
Judges, questions?
Yes. I believe when you talked about, you set your center point, ran your line forward and backward, and you said you turned 90-degree angles off of that. How did you do that?
With knowing that we had a 5-degree northwest, or north 5 degrees west angle, we had our declination set to on a compass. So we rotated our compass to know that north was at, but 80. So if you have 5, we took it and we went to 85.
So you used your compass?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Got it. Simple answer.
Judges, any?
So we actually didn't have 90s in our corners of our property though, and we knew that, and that's why we used the coordinates. And we hand calculated them out to move around the parcels.
Questions from the audience? What was your final area?
It was 0.996 acres.
Back here.
Yes, my question is, when you were rerunning your level loop, did you have to rerun the entire loop, or had you created benchmarks along the way to check back into it?
We ran it back really quick, and I think we ran the whole level loop. We're pretty good at running a level. So we ran the whole level loop back in probably 15 minutes.
Anybody else? More questions?